Hi everyone! Yay! We're back to Harry Potter Sorcerer's Stone. Good morning. We are reading today Harry Potter Sorcerer's Stone, Chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. Nearly 10 years has passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on their front step, but Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into the living room, which was almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when Mr. Dursley had seen that faithful news report about the owls. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been a lot of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball wearing different colored bobble hats. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby, and now the photographs showed a large, blond boy riding his first bicycle on a roundabout on the fair, playing on a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room held no sign at all that another boy lived in the house, too. Yet Harry Potter was still there, asleep at the moment, but not for long. His Aunt Petunia was awake, and it was her shrill voice which made the first noise of the day. "Up! Up now! Get up!" Harry woke up with a start. His aunt rapped on the door again. "Up!" she screeched. Harry heard her walking towards the kitchen, and then the sound of frying pans being put on the cooker. He rolled on to his back and tried to remember the dream he had been having. It was a good one. There had been a flying motorbike in it. He had a funny feeling he had the same dream before. His aunt was back outside the door. "Are you up yet?" she demanded. "Nearly," said Harry. "Well, get a move on. I want you to look after the bacon. And don't you dare let it burn. I want everything perfect on Dudley's birthday." Harry groaned. "What did you say?" His aunt snapped through the door. "Nothing, nothing." Dudley's birthday. How could he have forgotten? Harry got slowly out of bed and started looking for socks. He found a pair under his bed and, after pulling a spider off of one of them, put them on. Harry was used to spiders because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was where he slept. When he was dressed, he went down to the hall into the kitchen. The table was almost hidden beneath all of Dudley's birthday presents. It looked as though Dudley had gotten a new computer he wanted, not to mention the second television, the racing bike. Why exactly Dudley wanted a racing bike was a mystery to Harry, as Dudley was very fat and hated exercise, unless of course it involved punching somebody. Dudley's favorite punching bag was Harry, but he couldn't often catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Perhaps it had something to do with living in the dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was because of all he had to wear were old clothes of Dudley's, and Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. Harry had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of sellotape because of all the times Dudley had punched him in the nose. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was his very thin scar on his forehead, which was shaped like a lightning bolt. He had it as long as he could remember, and the first question he could ever remember asking Aunt Petunia was how he had gotten it. "In a car crash when your parents died," she had said, "and don't ask questions." And don't ask questions, that was the first rule for a quiet life at the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen as Harry was turning over the bacon. "Comb your hair," he barked, by the way of morning greeting. About once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of the newspaper and shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together, but it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. Harry was frying eggs by the time Dudley arrived in the kitchen with his mother. Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He was large, pink-faced, not much neck, small, watery blue eyes, and thick blonde hair that lay smoothly on his thick, fat neck. And Petunia often said that Dudley looked like a baby angel. Harry often said that Dudley looked like a pig in a wig. Harry put the plates of eggs and bacon on the table, which was difficult as there wasn't much room. Dudley, meanwhile, was counting his presents. His face fell. 36, he said, looking up at his mother and father. That's 2 less than last year. Darling, you haven't counted Auntie Margie's present. See, it's here under the big one from Mummy and Daddy. All right, 37 then, said Dudley, going red in the face. Harry, who could see a large Dudley tantrum coming on, began wolfing down bacon as fast as possible in case Dudley turned over the table. Aunt Petunia obviously scented danger too, because she said quickly, "And we'll buy you another 2 presents while we're out today. How's that, Pumpkin? 2 more presents? Is that all right?" Dudley thought for a moment. It looked like hard work. Finally, he said slowly, "So I'll have 39, sweetums," said Aunt Petunia. "Oh." Dudley sat down heavily and grabbed the nearest parcel. "All right, then." Uncle Vernon chuckled. "Ha ha ha! Little Tyke wants his money's worth, just like his father. Attaboy, Dudley!" He ruffled Dudley's hair. At the moment the telephone rang, Aunt Petunia went to answer it, while Harry and Uncle Vernon watched Dudley unwrap the racing bike, a cine camera, a remote control aeroplane, 16 new computer games, and a video recorder. He was ripping the paper off a gold wristwatch when Aunt Petunia came back from the telephone looking both angry and worried. "Bad news, Vernon," she said. "Miss Figg broken her leg. She can't take him." She jerked her head in Harry's direction. Dudley's mouth fell open in horror, but Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year on Dudley's birthday, his parents took him and a friend out for the day to adventure parks, hamburger bars, or the cinema. Every year, Harry was left behind with Mrs. Figg, a mad old lady who lived 2 streets away. Harry hated it there. The whole house smelled like cabbage, and Mrs. Figg made him look at photographs of all their cats she'd ever owned. "Now what?" said Petunia, looking furiously at Harry as though he'd planned this. Harry knew he ought to feel sorry that Mrs. Figg had broken her leg, but it wasn't easy when he reminded himself it would be a whole year before he'd have to look at Tibbles, Snowy, Mr. Paws, and Tufty again. "We could phone Marge," Uncle Vernon suggested. "Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy." The Dudsleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather, as though he was something very nasty that couldn't understand them, like a slug. What's her name? Your friend Yvonne? On holiday in Morica, snapped Aunt Petunia. "You could just leave me here," Harry put out hopefully. "He'll be able to watch whatever he wanted on television for a change, and maybe even go on Dudley's computer." Oh gosh, I feel like there's a hair. Aunt Petunia looked as though she'd just swallowed a lemon. "Oh, come back and find the house. And come back and find the house in ruins," she sneered. "I won't blow up the house," said Harry, but they weren't listening. "I suppose we could take him to the zoo," said Aunt Petunia slowly, "and leave him in the car." "The new car? He's not sitting in there alone." Dudley began to cry loudly. In fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been years since he'd really cried. But he knew that if he screwed up his face and wailed, his mother would give him anything he wanted. "Dinky Duddy Dums, don't cry. Mummy won't let him spoil your special day," she cried, flinging her arms around him. "I don't want him to come," Dudley yelled between huge pretend sobs. "He always spoils everything." He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Just then the doorbell rang. "Oh, good Lord, they're here," said Aunt Petunia frantically. And a moment later, Dudley's best friend, Piers Polkins, walked in with his mother. Piers was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dudley hit them. Dudley stopped pretending to cry at once. Half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dursleys' car with Piers and Dudley on the way to the zoo for the first time in his life. His aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with him, but before they'd left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside. "I'm warning you," he had said, putting his large purple face right up to Harry's. "I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business, anything at all, and you'll be in the cupboard from now until Christmas." "I'm not going to do anything," said Harry, "honestly." The problem was, strange things often happened around Harry, and it was just no good telling the Dursleys that he didn't make them happen. Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barber. Once Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barber looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen shears and cut his hair so short he almost bald, except for the fringe which she had left to hide the horrible scar. Dudley had laughed himself silly at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he'd already been laughed at for his baggy clothes and sellotape glasses. The next morning, however, he had gotten up to find his hair exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared them off. He had been given a week in his cupboard for this, as though he had tried to explain, even though he tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into a revolting jumper of Dudley's, brown with orange baubles. The harder she tried to pull it over his head, the smaller it seemed to become, until finally it might have fitted a glove puppet, but certainly wouldn't fit Harry. Aunt Petunia had decided it must have shrunk in the wash, and to his great relief, Harry wasn't punished. On the other hand, he had gotten into terrible trouble for being found on the roof of the school kitchens. Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual when, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's, there he was, sitting on the chimney. The Dursleys had received a very angry letter from Harry's headmistress telling them that Harry had been climbing school buildings, but all he tried to do, as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked doors of his cupboard, was jump behind the big bins outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him in mid-jump, but today nothing was going to go wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and Piers to be spending the day somewhere that wasn't school, his cupboard, or Mr. Figgs's cabbage-smelling living room. While he drove, Uncle Vernon complained to Aunt Petunia he'd like to complain about things. People at work, Harry, the council, Harry, the bank, and Harry were just a few of his favorite subjects. This morning, it was motorbikes. "Roaring along like maniacs, the young hoodlums," he said, as the motorbikes overtook them. "I had a dream about motorbikes," said Harry, remembering suddenly. "It was flying." Uncle Vernon nearly crashed into the car in front. He turned around in his seat and yelled at Harry, his face like a gigantic beetroot with a mustache. "Motorbikes don't fly!" Dudley and Piers snickered. "I know they don't," said Harry. "It was only a dream." But he'd wish he hadn't said anything. If there was one thing the Dursleys hated even more than his asking questions, it was his talking about things acting in a way it shouldn't, no matter if it was a dream or even a cartoon. They seemed to think it might give him dangerous ideas. It was a very sunny Saturday, and the zoo was crowded with families. The Dursleys bought Dudley and Piers large chocolate ice creams at the entrance of, and then because the smiling lady in the van had asked Harry what he wanted before they could hurry him away, they bought him a cheap lemon ice lolly. But that wasn't bad either, Harry thought, licking it as they watched the gorilla scratching his head and looking remarkably like Dudley, except it wasn't blonde. Harry had the best morning he had had in a long time. He was careful to walk a little way apart from the Dursleys, so that Dudley and Piers, who were starting to get bored with the animals by lunchtime, wouldn't fall back on their favorite hobby of hitting him. They ate in the zoo restaurant, and when Dudley had a tantrum because his Knickerbocker glory wasn't big enough, Uncle Vernon bought him another one, and Harry was allowed to finish the first. Harry felt afterwards that he should have known it was all too good to last. After lunch, they went to the reptile house. It was cool and dark in there, with lit windows all along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Dudley and Piers wanted to see large poisonous cobras and thick man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place. It could have wrapped its body twice around Uncle Vernon's car and crushed it into a dustbin. But at the moment it didn't look in the mood. In fact, it was fast asleep. Dudley stood with his nose pressed against the glass, staring at the glistening brown coils. "Make it move," he whined at his father, but Uncle Vernon tapped on the glass. The snake didn't budge. "Do it again," Dudley ordered. Uncle Vernon rapped on the glass smartly with his knuckles, but the snake just snoozed on. "This is boring," Dudley moaned and shuffled away. Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised it had died of boredom itself. No company except stupid people drumming his fingers on the glass, trying to disturb it all day long. It was worse than having a cupboard at his bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on the door to wake him up. At least he got to visit the rest of the house. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes slowly, very slowly. It raised its head until its eyes were on the level of Harry's. It winked. Harry stared. Then he looked quickly around to see if anybody was watching. They weren't. He looked back at the snake and winked too. The snake jerked its head towards Uncle Vernon and Dudley, then raised his eyes to the ceiling and gave Harry a look that said quite plainly, "I get it all the time." "I know," Harry murmured through the glass, though he wasn't sure the snake could hear him. "It must be really annoying." The snake nodded vigorously. "Where do you come from, anyways?" Harry asked. The snake jabbed its tail to the little sign next to the glass. Harry peered at it. "Boa constrictor, Brazil." "Was it nice there?" The boa constrictor jabbed its tail to the sign again, and Harry read on. "This specimen was bred in the zoo." "Oh, I see. So you've never been to Brazil." As the snake shook its head, a deafening shout behind Harry made them both jump. "Dudley! Mr. Dursley! Come and look at this snake! You won't believe what it's doing!" Dudley came waddling towards them as fast as he could. "Out of the way, you!" he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry had fallen hard on the concrete floor. What came next happened so fast that no one saw how it happened. One second, Piers and Dudley were leaning against so close to the glass. The next, they had leapt back with howls of horror. Harry sat up, gasped. The front glass of the boa constrictor's tank had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering out onto the floor. People throughout the reptile house screamed and started running for exits. As the snake slid swiftly past him, Harry could have sworn in a low, hissing voice said, "Brazil, here I come. Thanks, amigo." The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. But the glass, He kept saying, "Where did the glass go?" The zoo director itself made Aunt Petunia a cup of strong sweet tea while he apologized over and over again. Piers and Dudley could only gibber. As far as Harry had seen, the snake hadn't done anything except snap playfully at the heels as it had passed, but by the time they walked back to Uncle Vernon's car, Dudley was telling them how it nearly bitten off his leg, while Piers was swearing it tried to squeeze him to death. But worst of all, for Harry at least, was Piers calming down enough to say, "Harry was talking to it, weren't you, Harry?" Yikes. Uncle Vernon waited until Piers was safely out of the house before starting on Harry. He was so angry. He could hardly speak. He managed to say, "Go! Cupboard! Stay! No meals!" before he collapsed into a chair and Aunt Petunia had to run and get him a large brandy. Harry lay on the dark cupboard much later, wishing he had a watch. He didn't know what time it was, and he could not be sure that the Dursleys were asleep yet. Until they were, he could not risk sneaking into the kitchens for some food. He lived with the Dursleys almost 10 years, 10 miserable years, as long as he could remember. Ever since he'd been a baby and his parents had died in the car crash, he couldn't remember being in a car when his parents had died. Sometimes, when he was strained his memory during long hours in his cupboard, he came up with a strange vision, a blinding flash of green light, and a burning pain in his forehead. This, he supposed, was the crash, though he couldn't imagine where all the green light had come from. He couldn't remember his parents at all. His aunt and uncle never spoke about them, and of course he was forbidden to ask questions. There were no photographs of them in the house. When he had been younger, Harry had dreamed and dreamed of some unknown relation coming to take him away, but it never happened. The Dursleys were his only family, yet sometimes he thought, or maybe hoped, that strangers in the street seemed to know him. Very strange strangers they were, too. A tiny man in a violet top cap had bowed to him once while out shopping with Aunt Petunia and Dudley. After asking Harry furiously if he knew the man, Aunt Petunia had rushed him out of the shop without buying anything. A wild-looking old woman, dressed all in green, had waved merrily at him on the bus. A bald man in a very long purple coat had actually shaken his hand on the street the other day, and then walked away without a word. The weirdest thing, though, about these people was the way they seemed to vanish the second Harry tried to get a closer look. At school, Harry had no one. Everyone knew the Dudley gang hated the odd Harry Potter in his baggy old clothes and the broken glasses, and nobody liked to disagree with the Dudley's gang. Bye, guys.